Hello, and welcome to this panel discussion introducing you to law reform and social justice at ANU. My name is Varshini, and I'm a Bachelor of International Relations and Law Honors student here at ANU. Joining me in conversation today are Associate Professor Matthew Zagor, Director of the LRSJ, Kimberly Slapp, a recent graduate from ANU and LRSJ Manager, and Tess Kelly, an ANU alumnus who undertook an Aurora internship in the Northern Territory and is currently pursuing a master's in public administration at the Harvard Kennedy School focused on health and justice policy. Before we begin our discussion, I'd like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose lands and airwaves we gather today and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people who are the traditional owners here in Canberra, where our ANU campus is situated. I'd also like to extend my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders viewers watching this session today. Before we begin, is there anything else you would like to add to your bios, or are we ready to go? Okay, Matthew, if I can begin with you as director, can you please share a brief overview of the law reform and social justice and explain how it really embodies the ethos of the ANU College of Law?
Thanks, Varshini. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge their ancient and enduring culture and law. Social justice work has to start with the ongoing and unfinished business of Indigenous justice, and that also lies at the core of what we're doing at the LRSJ. So the LRSJ arose out of a discussion amongst faculty members way back in the early 2000s that was led by the then Dean, Michael Coper, about what we stood for as a college. So not just what it meant to be the national law school in the national capital, but what values and principles and perspectives we aspire to instill in our students, that we want to project to the community here in Canberra, nationally, regionally, internationally. So what image is going to be conjured when one thinks of the ANU College of Law? And out of that came the establishment of the LRSJ, the appointment of its first director, Professor Simon Rice, and the express commitment of the college to pursue an ethos of law reform and social justice. So what does that mean? Well, the law is concerned with individual justice, that's uncontentious, but it's also concerned with social justice, with the equal enjoyment of rights, and with addressing the structural and systemic inequalities that impede that equal enjoyment, and that are connected to a range of other factors: economic, social, historical, environmental. So that was seen as something worth standing for. And part of that vision is an understanding that lawyers and law students not just have something to say about social and environmental injustices, but we have an obligation to do something about it. So what exactly is the LRSJ and what are we doing about it? Well, it's the primary vehicle for achieving, overseeing that vision and providing opportunities to students to get involved in primarily student-led, often student-inspired projects around a whole range of issues: environmental injustice, Indigenous reconciliation, community legal education, corporate accountability, refugee rights, human rights advocacy in Australia, as well as social justice issues overseas. So, for instance, last year we started a project assisting a community legal centre in Gujarat in India, the Centre for Social Justice, that assists Adivasi and Dalit communities, it's tribal and so-called untouchable communities, in their access to justice. And we've also been deeply involved in the internship programs with the Kimberley Community Legal Service, Darwin Community Legal Service, and certain legal aid organizations in the Pacific. So all of these projects will produce research, organize events, summarize case laws, produce blogs, newsletters, write law reform submissions. In fact, we have a project that is specifically dedicated to the writing of law reform submissions to parliamentary inquiries. And these projects will be overseen by academics, alumni, practitioners, subject matter experts, so that students have an opportunity to work with those subject matter experts, but also have this hands-on experiential learning opportunities. Very briefly, we also have a structured training program to skill up students in various areas to make them better human rights and environmental advocates and campaigners. And we have an events program that runs all year that students can get involved in. So for instance, we just co-hosted a workshop with Myanmar activists and advocates. We have an upcoming panel on the death penalty. We're going to be screening a documentary about biodiversity protection in Kosciuszko in September, hopefully the castle in October. And we're planning a full-day workshop on strategic litigation towards the end of semester. So we'll be looking at Indigenous justice, environmental justice, and refugee protection and rights in that context. There's a range of other different moving parts, and we try and inject our work into the curriculum and tap into the goodwill of alumni like Tess, who's on our panel today. We also have Kieran Pendar, for instance, who's been helping out on a project with the Australian Human Rights Law Centre. So we're tapping into that goodwill amongst our former students, even after they leave the safety of Canberra and start to do great things in the wider world. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks so much, Matthew. Seems like there's a lot going on in LRSJ, very interesting opportunities for prospective students who would like to explore the social justice side of the law. And I think one of the appeals for LRSJ is the diverse range of student-led projects that you briefly covered, Matthew. Kimberly, as the manager, can you please provide us a brief snapshot of these projects and their aims?
Sure, yeah. So Matthew just touched on one of our projects that was started last year, which worked in partnership with the Centre for Social Justice in India, producing case summaries that go to their Supreme Court to do with topical legal issues. But there are also a range of projects to do with more general legal research. For example, you also mentioned the Research Hub, which researches and produces submissions to public inquiries. So primarily, being in Canberra is great because we're in such close proximity to the Commonwealth government, for example. So they produce many submissions to parliamentary or Senate inquiries up there on the Hill. And I think this is really good experience actually doing some real world law reform. Some students after their submissions have been even called to give oral evidence to the hearings. And our Research Hub reports are often cited in the final reports in these law reform processes. So to actually be involved in that process is really valuable for students. We also have, for example, the Human Rights Project. So their goal is to improve access to human rights law in the ACT, and they're looking to branch out more widely in Australia. So they track the cases that go through the ACT courts that reference the Human Rights Act in the ACT. So now this kind of database that has been compiled by the students is being used by practitioners and scholars, and it's a great way to track how that Human Rights Act has had some real world impact in the ACT. Green Law is another example. So they are primarily focused on environmental justice, and they started out as an LRSJ project, and now they're an incorporated NGO doing some legal research and advocacy into these environmental justice issues. Importantly, I think, not just for this project, but more generally, students not only can develop their legal research and writing, but also have exposure to these people working in the field and these NGOs, for example, who we work with and collaborate with to produce this work. And so I think that opens a lot of doors for students as well, being able to have that exposure. And Vash, you've been involved in the CLE, the Community Legal Education Project. So they've been doing some really great work as well, developing and delivering lessons to high school students in Canberra to do with topical issues that affect youth, such as digital privacy, employment law. And so I think that's also some really great legal experience to be able to deliver that content in a way that's accessible to people who need it, such as high school students.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. That was a great snapshot of all the projects that LRSJ has to offer. It really is a wide breadth of interest that students can pursue here. And it seems like they can not only improve their skills of legal writing, but they can also gain real life world experiences from the very beginning of their law studies through getting involved with projects like these. That sounds great. And thank you for touching on the CLE part. I would like to talk a little bit about CLE because it was a very special part of my experience at the law school. Until very recently, I was leading the project. And as you said, Kimberly, we organized groups of student volunteers who go around to high schools around Canberra and inform today's youth about legal issues relevant to them, such as the ones you touched on: labor law, digital privacy, environmental law, which is very topical today. So through this project, I not only learned skills regarding leadership, which is involved with leading a project like this, but also skills around how to condense complex legal information into something that students can understand and take away from, and also create change upon. So those were some really interesting skills I learned through CLE. I also got to meet really interesting students from very different backgrounds, and I'm still friends with them throughout my law school experience. So I would recommend students join groups within the LRSJ. Tess, let's go to you. Can you tell us a little bit about how you became involved in the LRSJ and how this experience shaped your own journey in law academically and professionally?
Absolutely. Well, firstly, it's such a privilege to be here with you all today and to hear how the LRSJ has grown and the wonderful work that the students are doing. I think that's a real testament to all of you here and to Matthew and his vision kind of really growing the nature of this program over the years. I guess I got involved in the LRSJ in its very early days. I was taking Simon Rice's Human Rights Law in Australia course. And at the time, one of the early projects the LRSJ got involved in was the Ready for Recognition campaign. So I was involved with another few students in developing some educational materials and some workshops for students and for groups around Canberra about opportunities for constitutional recognition for the recognition of First Nations people. And I guess through that project, I learned sort of several things. One of them was thinking about how the law can be used as a tool to achieve social change and sort of really connecting the things that I was learning in class in human rights law and constitutional law with the real world application of those topics. It also gave me an insight into how law and policy intersect, and a very early insight into, I guess, some of the challenges in law reform. And I've ended up sort of working in the law reform space in the Northern Territory of Australia. And I think many of the things that I saw throughout the Ready for Recognition campaign and some of the challenges that faced a few years ago, but that we're going to be, I think, seeing, I hope to see some real progress in the next few years in that space. And I think, I guess I had an early insight into that through the LRSJ and being able to be involved in that project. And then I think this is also something Varsh mentioned before, but just the opportunity to connect with other students at ANU that are also passionate about using their law degrees to contribute to, social justice and social justice projects. And I think I found that to be really beneficial because I knew there was a lot of people at ANU that were passionate about going in those directions, but sometimes I think people don't know where to look in terms of next steps when you graduate. And so I definitely found that community and the friends that I made through that time just have gone on to be, friends and connections for a long time. And funnily enough, many of us have ended up working together in, Aboriginal legal services, community legal services, other organisations, up in Darwin. There's a big contingent of ANU alumni, many of whom were part of some of those projects that we worked on together at ANU. So I think definitely the connections that you make at uni through projects like the LRSJ are really, really valuable. And so, I'm so grateful to have had those experiences.
Thank you so much, Tess. It sounds like your time at LRSJ and at ANU at large really inspired you to pursue this amazing career. And thank you for sharing that. I think one of the impressive characteristics about LRSJ is also its strong output of research. Matthew, can you please share some of the proudest examples of the work that has been done in this research area, and maybe some examples about how submissions for law reform have gotten through to government inquiries, for example?
Here you go. 2 years of COVID, and I still neglect to hit the unmute button. Yeah, thanks for the question. It's been mentioned a couple of times now that we have this dedicated project to developing that skill set in researching and writing the law reform submission. It's a very specific skill, right? It's very different from what students are used to doing in the classroom environment. How to pitch it, how to structure it, how to think about the committee that's going to be reading it, how long it should be, what recommendations to work with. Trying to understand the political and policy environment is really important in writing and getting attention for a law reform submission. So I'm very proud of the work that the Research Hub has done. Kimberly mentioned that their reports are frequently cited in the final reports of the committees, which is really impressive. As an academic, if you get cited in a parliamentary inquiry report, you pop it onto your CV. Same thing for the students. It's really, it shows actual impact. In the last 2 years, we've also seen, I think on 3 occasions, students invited to give oral evidence before the committees, which really indicates that their submissions have been taken seriously. Then I get to work with the students on how to prepare yourself to give oral evidence before a committee. It can be quite intimidating, but also quite inspiring at the same time. So I think that's something I'm very proud of, and I think it's growing, and we're seeing it come up in some of the courses that we run at the law school as well, where law reform submission writing is now part and parcel of the assessment regime. So we're starting to see that LRSJ ethos that we talk about integrated into the curriculum, and that's a really important achievement. In terms of a specific example of impact, I would choose really the very first thing that Green Law did, which was a submission into an inquiry into the Environment and Biodiversity, Environment Protection Biodiversity Protection Act, the EPBC Act. They looked at every single case in which the Act had been referenced to try and ascertain the access to justice provisions and the standing provisions in the Act. And they submitted that to a very high-level inquiry into the workings of the legislation that influenced the recommendations that were then made. Hasn't yet influenced the reform of the legislation, but maybe it will in the future. One of the things that I know it's not directly within the question that you asked, Varshini, but I thought I would emphasize nonetheless that Green Law have done that I think is fabulous. I wasn't involved in this at all, by the way, so I certainly can't take credit. The students themselves came up with this. They've developed something called the Green Tea Program, which recognizes the importance of having to cope with the difficult emotions that arise when you're working in this area, whether it's climate grief or witnessing what's happening with our environment, with the fires and the floods. This is something that I think can be done in all the different programs, because when you start working in this area, you can burn out, you can lose hope and motivation. You have to sort of constantly recharge and work as a community. So the program's been designed with a trained psychotherapist called Christy Wilson, who's a specialist in ecological grief, and it walks the participants through various self-care techniques and practical steps, something I think is really valuable and really important for the next generation as they confront these issues.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That was a great overview of some of the exceptional research that our students have done through LRSJ. And I agree that ANU instills a sort of research component into a lot of its education, so that you're always thinking about how to reform the law and how to do better, which it's been great so far for me, at least. And I think we've covered a little bit about the skills that students can gain through becoming involved in the LRSJ, but Kimberly, I was wondering if you would like to elaborate on these.
Yeah, I think we've mentioned a lot about, those kind of tangible, employable skills like legal research, legal writing, which I think is really important, because any law student who wants to go into the field, like, these skills are so important, and it's something that you do have to develop and refine. But also, like Tess mentioned, being able to meet other kind of like-minded students who have similar passions to you and similar interests, because not only do you kind of create these relationships and connections with people, but you can develop it as well. So many of these projects have come about from students getting together, maybe through various projects in the LRSJ, and then being able to identify maybe something that needs a little bit more work and creating a project out of that, and being able to work together to develop that idea and pursue that area of social justice or law reform. And I think, again, it just opens so many doors for you, especially whether you're interested in this before you come to uni or not. Having this exposure to professionals in the field, in the sector, and being able to work with NGOs and create working relationships with academics is something that you might not have the opportunity to do in a lot of other places. And so you never know how that can kind of shape your career after uni. You might end up like really finding your passion or an interest that you want to pursue. And I think it sounds like that was kind of Tessa's experience as well. And I think for me, it's definitely strengthened my resolve to go into the area. So yeah, I think it's really useful in that way as well.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. I definitely agree. It teaches you a lot of big picture thinking as well, to understand what areas need a little bit more work, and to sort of design a project with the help of other students. That takes a lot of initiative and skill, and that's something the LRSJ definitely inspires in students. It helps you meet peers with similar interests, professionals, academics in the area who could further inspire you or be excellent connections going forward, and so much more. So I really encourage students to explore this avenue if they're interested in social justice. And increasingly, we see that the ANU College of Law has been developing internship opportunities for students with a passion for social justice. Matthew, can you tell us some things about the focus of LRSJ on experiential learning and the opportunities available?
Thanks, Vash. So yeah, opportunities available outside of the student-led projects, so within the internship program itself, which we're for 6 months of the year, I'm also the supervisor and the convener of the internship program. The other 6 months is Jonathan Learblad, and it was recognised by the law school that many of the interns are going out and working in the NGO and community sector. And even if they're not, some of them are going into the private sector, but they're still working on law reform related activities. So last year I had someone working at a local firm here in Canberra who just got really interested in tenancy rights in that context. They were representing someone. In fact, they were representing not the tenant, but the landlord, but they thought that there was a gap in the law there that needed to be filled. And that's what they researched and wrote their paper on. So you can do law reform work in a variety of settings, including within the public service, of course, as well. So it was recognized that the internship program, which provides students with an opportunity to work and get credit for that work in a range of professional settings, as long as they are being supervised by a lawyer, that had a lot of synergies with the ethos of the law school and the LRSJ. So it made sense to have the LRSJ director involved in that project. One of the things we've done in that context is started to showcase the work of the interns. So for instance, I mentioned before that we had a lot of students going up to the Kimberley to work at the KCLS, which has offices in Kununurra and in Broome. And we took a cohort of those students and had an event around the research they produced around mostly Indigenous issues, the confrontation with not just the criminal justice system, which we're very familiar with, but with social services and the welfare system. And so we had an event highlighting their research, and then we can use their research by putting it up online. We had another event with students who had been placed with Walk Free, which is a modern slavery NGO based in London, who had produced a whole set of research. A lot of it was empirically based, really interesting, around this supply chain, connecting the product to its origin in a modern slavery context. And so we had 3 students on a panel there talking about that research. And that also highlighted the organization itself, because it's not just about highlighting the students, it's highlighting the organizations that they're working with. And then we had a broader one around a whole range of different internships showcasing the work of the students, which I was unfortunately unable to attend, but was apparently very successful earlier this year. So we're starting to see, again, that integrating of the LRSJ program into the internship program and the growth of both of them within the College of Law.
Thanks so much, Matthew. It sounds like there's great opportunities within the social justice area, whether that's internships or LRSJ, and how the two are coming together to supplement one another. Staying on the topic of internships, Tess, I think one of the transformative experiences for you was the Aurora internship. Would you like to elaborate on how this experience shaped your career outlook?
Yeah, definitely. This sort of, builds on what Matthew was just saying about how having the opportunity to go and work in an organization, you can sort of have a real insight into the practical application of the things that you're learning at university. So I was lucky enough to do an Aurora internship where I went to Darwin, and I worked at the Top End Women's Legal Service, working on a law reform submission about the Northern Territory sexual violence prevention and legislation in that space. And I think for me, that came at a really important, quite pivotal time, because it was the time that we just applied for clerkships and, thinking about what I would do when I graduated. I was clerking at a law firm that summer in Sydney, and kind of had this strong narrative or rhetoric that I was hearing both on the ANU campus, but then just more generally about the fact that if you want to do human rights, social justice, social impact, that the way to get there is through becoming a corporate lawyer, becoming a good lawyer that way, and then going into the NGO or community legal service space. And whilst I'm not discrediting that as a really valid pathway, into this space. I think going up to Darwin and doing the work that I did for the Top End Women's Legal Service at that time, I got an insight into how, firstly, there's a real need for passionate people to bring their skills, their energy, their perspectives to really under-resourced organisations. And that there's an opportunity to learn so much by just diving straight in. And so I guess, like, on one hand, I was seeing how these under-resourced organizations, you're often not going to have the same, like, really clear training pathway and structure that you might have if you go into a corporate firm. But for me, I saw also, like, I guess there's the challenges, but then the real opportunity. And I knew that I wanted to be kind of in that area, and it was just about what's the best pathway to get there. And so I think, going up to Darwin, doing that internship for me was really transformative, because it gave me that insight, but then also a bit of confidence, and realizing, at ANU, I've learned some really great things. I've had some opportunity to learn from some fantastic professors. I've worked really hard. And, I'm ready to dive in. And so I think also sort of, getting over that little stumbling block where you think, oh, I'm not ready to do the work I care about. I need to go and do more training. That's true. Like, we can always be learning and improving and growing. But I don't think that it's impossible to dive in and do the work that you care about straight away, because that's certainly what I ended up doing, and I never looked back. So I was really grateful to have that opportunity kind of whilst at law school. And then years later, working at Danila Health Service, I also had the opportunity of having several ANU law students come through and do internships with me, and Aurora interns come and work with me. And again, just seeing the value of having these really passionate, really clever young people coming to Darwin and getting straight, really involved straight up with really important work. We ran a class action against the Northern Territory government about the ongoing conditions in juvenile detention at Dondale. And, I had really helpful interns that were reviewing relevant parts of the NT Royal Commission, that were pulling out, emerging evidence about child brain development, all sorts of really important pieces of research that we could feed into the work that we were doing with Northern Territory Legal Aid, representing children in juvenile detention. So I think there's real opportunities to contribute to really important work as an intern. And sometimes, it might feel like you're, not in the action all the time, but I think the great thing with an internship is that you get an insight into how these kinds of organizations work. No matter, where you're contributing, you're definitely getting that insight. And then, you're having the opportunity to add value to really under-resourced organizations that are doing really, really important work. So I guess that's kind of was my takeaway at the time, was like, I care about this, I want to do it now. And I did end up doing that, and it's all worked out for me. So I often have law students like saying, I think maybe I need to go to Sydney and work in a firm first. And that's great. That's a great pathway for some people. But certainly for me, the experience of just moving straight to the NT when I graduated, working for a judge, and then working in at Legal Aid and at Danila Dilba has been a really wonderful opportunity. So I'd encourage you to just go for it if people are wondering what to do next, I guess. But that's me.
Thank you so much, Tess. I think that really confirms that there's no one pathway for law students outside of academics. You can, pursue the clerkship and then go into social justice if that's what you're interested in. But like you can start off running, in a social justice career and still contribute greatly to society. Thank you so much for that. Okay, I might just ask you quickly, Kimberly, how our students and viewers can learn more about the LRSJ and get involved in the future?
Yeah, so we, our student projects and us as a project as well, we're always putting on events. Matthew mentioned that we've got a full calendar of screenings and panel discussions set for semester 2. So that's how I personally got involved, was, coming to these things and learning more about the work that the LRSJ was doing. But we've also got a Facebook page, which we regularly update with call outs for some help with projects or some information about what's going on in the space. So that's always available. And we've also got the website as well, where there's a heap of information about each particular project, and you can see what they're actually doing, because we post their research output onto there as well. Or you can always just email us. We're always happy to answer any questions as well, at lrsj@anu.edu.au. But yeah, it is never too early to start. I think everyone has to start somewhere, and I think it adds so much value to your studies as well, no matter where in your degree you are. So yeah, there's a lot of ways you can get involved.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. Just to clarify, can students just Google LRSJ ANU and find the website? That's amazing. Okay. And I hope all of the prospective students and current students do get involved. And I think that's a fitting note for us to conclude the conversation. I'd like to thank our wonderful panelists for sharing their insights and experiences. If you would like to learn more about the law reform and social justice at ANU, you can find out more information and links to other resources in the description of this video. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye for now.